Your brain is a muscle. There is only so much you can learn in a day through constraints between time, fatigue, or you're working a job and this is all you can do on the side. But you want to hit that point where you really feel like you're stretching your knowledge and you're pushing your brain to your limits, because that's the only way that you're going to accomplish this within a 2-week time frame. Hey guys, what's up? Sorry for the delay. I am now going to cover verbal and quant sections of the GMAT in this video, and in part 3, the next video, will be just covering the essay and me doing a live type through of the essay. So without further ado, let's dive into some of the stuff, starting with the verbal section of the GMAT. Before we do some practice problems, I want to just give some tips about the GMAT verbal section and how you should pace yourself and what you should do as you answer the questions. And the first thing is you should time box all of your questions to 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. What this means is as you start the test, the questions are going to be easier. You should be able to get them within 30 seconds to a minute, but at most keep it at 2 minutes. As you near the end of the section where the questions are all medium to hard level questions, you can time box it to 2.5 minutes, but at the 2.5 minute mark, unless you're on the last question and you have time to spare, you really should just try to answer the best you can and try to answer every question possible. Remember, the GMAT punishes you if you don't answer every question on the test, more so than if you got one wrong. Now, if you find yourself stuck on any question 2, the number one tip is to rephrase the question. As long as you identify the key part of what the question is trying to get you to answer, you can rephrase a lot of other parts of the sentence, as I'll show later in the practice questions. This includes rewording sections, omitting it, changing out the nouns, pronouns, whatever else that might help you with the context, so long as you keep that core part of the question intact. Building off that then, there's going to be a lot of noise around the main part of the question. They may give you a very long, verbose question, some facts that may not be true, that are there to try to distract you, but instead you really want to just focus on what the question is asking you to identify and fix. Next, another tip that you'll probably see me even use on medium hard questions is if I'm stuck, I can just go through process of elimination and really try to just narrow out which ones seem more correct to me. You only have, 5 options. So building off this, let's move on to the sentence correction section of the verbal first. You'll essentially be handed a question that's usually 1 to 3 sentences, and you'll be given 5 options. Each of the 5 options is slightly different. Generally 2 are similar, and then 1 may be a total long shot. A lot of the time, the longest question or the longest answer is usually not what you're looking for. Now, of course, take this with a grain of salt because it's not true to generalize every question. But if a question seems like the answer is overly verbose, convoluted, you're having a hard time following it, just because you're having that difficulty following it on a hard question doesn't mean that it's the correct answer. There is usually a very clear, correct answer, and it's not usually too nuanced. So another common thing is when you're going through the 5 options to answer, generally because 2 will look similar, 1 will be off, you can group together the wrong ones. So if you saw an example of like has versus have, and you know that it should have been have, then you can immediately just cross out the other 2 has and not worry about those. This gives you then a 1 in 3 chance of picking the correct answer. Generally also, if you're a native English speaker, a lot of these questions will not be too bad. There are very clear grammar rules in English to use that the GMAT focuses on rather than focusing on kind of these nuanced things. But if you're a non-native English speaker, what you really want to focus on is things like singular versus plurals, past, present, participle, perfect tenses, and other things like that. But I think the best way to learn is to just do sentence corrections over and over and over. You should do many tens to nearly hundreds of example questions of sentence corrections to really gain your skill, and we'll go over that later. Now, real briefly, also on the reading comprehension and passage section of the GMAT. This is a really time-consuming section, so pacing yourself will be harder. You first have to read the passage, and I recommend you read the passage fully before trying to answer questions and read the question. So make sure that you get up your skills as a fast reader. I'm personally a fast reader, about 2,000 words per minute, but you really need to get your reading comprehension up, and there's different ways to measure that and get better at it. First is just read more books. Read fantasy books, nonfiction books, textbooks, and really just get your reading skill up and practice on checking if you actually understand the concept and can remember it after reading it. Next, you can move on to reading comprehension websites, things that show you how much accuracy you're reading the words back with and how much you understood the passage, and there's plenty of them available on Google that you can just go and find. So now, assuming that you've gotten your reading speed up to par, to actually answer and analyze a passage correctly, look for the overarching main idea of the passage. These aren't complicated theses from PhDs. These are just multi-paragraph points with 1 or 2 main topics. So look for that main idea and base your questions off of that. And then third is, don't forget, you can revisit the passage. And if you're scared that you're going to forget something or you don't read fast enough and you want to write down ideas, you can. They give you a notepad. But note that when you simulate taking notes on the GMAT, I recommend that you get in the habit of mimicking the real test as much as possible. On the real test, you're not going to have your favorite pen and a nice sheet of paper and a lot of paper to use. They're going to give you a few pages of a laminated, like whiteboard style notepad, and they're going to give you a fairly thick marker, like a little bit thinner than an expo marker because they call it a fine tip, but it's going to be very different than what you're used to taking notes with. So if you're the type of person that takes a lot of notes while analyzing essays or reading passages or books, definitely try to emulate that as much as possible. I'll put a photo in somewhere like right here of what the notepad looks like and kind of why it throws you off, especially since it's more geared towards the math problems rather than the English problems. Do note, I heard some exam centers actually don't give you a notepad during the verbal section. I don't know what's up with that. But anyway, moving on to the actual content of the verbal section and me doing practice problems on my laptop right here as I'll narrate through them. So, all right, I have here the GMAT Club form. This is the website that I used almost entirely for studying the GMAT. So here, this is a form home. I recommend if you want to track your progress, you can sign up. This is not a plug. They don't endorse me. I just think that it's really useful. Anyway, most of the time I spent here was in the quantitative and verbal sections of the form. I personally didn't care too much to read, any of these other things of fluff because the point is you want to focus on the GMAT. So on the verbal section here, we have a bunch of subforms for critical reasoning, reading comprehension, sentence correction, and the analytical writing assessment. There's a lot of different threads here that you can go through, but I recommend finding some major power threads first to go through. So in the case of like critical reasoning, you can go here. You can go to this thread, critical reasoning question directory. And I recommend you start going through the easy questions first before going through the hard level questions. Now, if you already are maybe like an English major in college, maybe skip ahead to the harder stuff. The easy things may be too easy, but it's good to still cement your basis. So for each of these levels, there are different types of topics: assumptions, conclusions, strengthening argument, etc., all the way down to like method of reasoning. I recommend that you go through every single one of these and attempt a few practice problems. This sounds time consuming, but again, like I said in my first video regarding strategies, this is what you have to do. You need to time box it, you need to take it seriously, and you need to study as if it was the real test. You can do all of this in a Starbucks if you want. I did add a blue bottle, but you really need to make sure that you're going through these problems and seriously studying, because this is one of those things kind of like manual labor, just training your muscles where you just need to do it over and over and over. There's no real shortcut to not doing practice questions. However, there is a shortcut to doing well within 2 weeks, which is these video series that I'm giving you. Once you have all of these practice questions, you can just go here, you can click, and you'll have this person, Bunel, who basically posted every single question and answer that I used to study for this. This guy is a genius. He's pretty anonymous on the forum, but kudos to him. So you'll get this GMAT timer here. You can click this play button to start a timer as you answer the question. It will give you a difficulty and the question statistics. Now, I seriously stress, don't look too much about the difficulty, don't care too much about how many people got it correct or not, and don't scroll down and read the answer before you first attempted the question. I want you to read this question, read over it, make sure that you start the timer, and then really give it an honest attempt yourself, and then you can go through and start reading everyone's responses and debate about how the question is phrased and if it's a valid or BS question. So, in this example, we have in recent years, some painters of graffiti have been winning recognition as artists. Since graffiti is vandalism, painting graffiti is inherently a act of rebellion, blah, blah, blah. Which of the assumptions supports the drawing the conclusion? So you'll have A, B, C, D, and E. Now, what I want you to do is just go through these questions yourself, answer them. I'm not going to really show if I can answer it correctly because that's not any help to you, but that's basically the structure that I would do. Then once you're done that, go on to another question, do the same thing, try answering it. If you're confused or concerned, read these analyses about the correct answer and how these GMAT tutors reached it, and then you can rinse and repeat. And the reason why I'm not going to go too much into depth is some of these questions are copywritten. I'm just doing this purely for educational use. I'm not trying to show enough questions that you can really study for the test alone through my video. This forum is an awesome resource. All of the people on it are very helpful, and there's a ton of content. So go check out the forum. Go, use whatever resources are online, but I'm not really like a source to get practice questions. So with that said, that is just one part of it. You'll end up going through all of these points of questions, then moving up to all of these, going through them, and then all the way up to the 700 level questions. And at the point in which you should feel confident and ready to move on, or maybe assume that you're good for it on the test, is when you can start answering these 700 level questions pretty confidently. So if we go here to paradox questions on a 700 level, these questions get longer. They get more about kind of statistics and true analysis rather than just taking it at base level. The amount of people that get them correct starts to become in the minority. And this is where you really want to make sure that you use a timer and you can time it accurately and answer it within 2 minutes, because you might have to reread it and think about it a few times. And that's what can really slow you down on the real test, especially if you have nervous testing nerves like me. Now, likewise, what I'm going to give you advice to do for the quantitative is not that much different too. I'm just going to include it here. This is the same form, same website. You can go through, all you need for quant, Ultimate GMAT Quantitative Mega Thread. It will have a bunch of good concepts of math that you should go through. And this is hard. Not going to lie, math is really hard, and there's a lot of math tested in this. So if you don't have a STEM degree, math degree, computer science degree, you're going to have to focus probably 75% of your time on this. Like I said in my first video, the essay should be easy, it should be quick, you should just know it and then move on to studying this actual content. And math has a lot of content, especially if you're a native English speaker. This is your main priority. If you're not a native English speaker, that's up to you to decide, should I study more math? Should I study less English? I personally have found that a lot of people from Europe, UK, China have way better math skills than those of us raised in the US. So that's a point of contention for this. Anyway, for this arithmetic section now, again, you should go through all of them. If things are too easy, maybe skip ahead to styles of problem that you can't answer based off of the practice tests, which I said everyone should go through and do one diagnostic practice test before studying. And for me, a lot of the stuff, fractions, decimals, ratios, rate of change, percents and interest, there's a typo there. All of that should be fairly normal if you've taken any form of standardized testing before. Where it starts to get hard is when you start heading into some of these absolute value and modulo problems, min-max, some of these word problems, overlapping sets especially. I want to call this out. The GMAT that I took had a lot of overlapping sets problems, but there are ways to use Venn diagrams or other tricks or thought processes to really cement and understand it. And again, I'm not going to repeat it here because other people said it first, not me. So I encourage you to go to this section of the GMAT form and read it for yourself and take it from those people. If you don't know statistics, I definitely, you have to know statistics for the exam. You should check it out. This is not an exam where you need to know calculus. So if you took AP calculus or calculus in college, cool, it'll help you a bit. But statistics, if you've never taken a true statistics course, you need to know statistics. Again, likewise, combinatorics, you should know permutations, combinations, a lot of tricks to prime numbers. Probability is another part of statistics. Geometry, ways to calculate angles off of a graph. Coordinate theory, triangles. There's a lot of things here in this 20 to 29 section that I think most of us are going to have no recollection of. Maybe we did in a middle school or high school or math competitions. But if you're older and taking the GMAT now, especially many years out of college, this is going to be kind of insanity. And this is where you want to spend at least a week of your time studying. And these questions really screwed me over too at first. I think this is the difference between me scoring below a 700 on the math and scoring a 51 on the quant section. So there are a ton of problems here that this video would become, a week long if I tried to show you all of it. But I definitely encourage you to go through, check out mastering important concepts, and then reading through these threads about triangles, things beyond just simple Pythagorean theorems, different tricks about angles, and all of these concepts, and reading it a few times over if you're struggling with it, taking notes, doing whatever you can to study it best. And this is an overall general tip that I've learned working in a field that makes me think about problems a lot and think about problems all day, is your brain is a muscle. You can feel your brain power slowly depleting, and it gets stressed, you get a headache, it gets strained, you start feeling foggy. And this is an issue that I struggle with a lot too. So seriously, if you start to feel that fatigue, just like working out a muscle, push yourself to a fair amount, but then take a break, watch a video, get some coffee, go jog. That's a great thing to do. And then come back to it within 10 to 15 minutes and then keep going. Your brain is a muscle, more like your abs rather than your biceps. You can really push your abs hard. You can push your brain hard too. This is a little bit of a brewing analogy, but I feel like it helps because there is only so much you can learn in a day through constraints between time, fatigue, or you're working a job and this is all you can do on the side. But you want to hit that point where you really feel like you're stretching your knowledge and you're pushing your brain to your limits, because that's the only way that you're going to accomplish this within a 2-week time frame. If you're watching the series and say you're 4 months, 6 months away from your GMAT, then maybe that's less of an issue. Maybe you can take it a little slower. You can still cement these concepts in your head in your own pace, but I still really feel like your brain is a muscle. You should every day try to push it to understand or learn something that really hurt your brain to think about before, and then that you've known it if you can explain the problem back to a friend or a parent or someone nearby you, or maybe a study buddy. And if you want study buddies, and this video somehow blows up, maybe comment in below and search for study buddies, and maybe social media will do what it should do. But I think if there's a big takeaway I want you to get from this video and these tips that I've given you regarding the verbal and the quant section, it's that the verbal has a few more tips and tricks you can do to follow, and you just need to make sure that you're confident on your English, which is kind of a duh reason. But don't get distracted by other things online. Don't get distracted by buying textbooks. Just use these forms, follow this flow of problems, follow using the timer, clicking A, B, C, D, E, reading, responses that people have, going through many, many questions, and then spending a lot of time on this math. There's just seriously too much for me to go into, but if there's any specific problems you want me to go into, I would be happy to. But yeah, take advantage of the GMAT form. Take advantage of when you sign in, it will track things about you. You can bookmark problems. You can check your average timing and everything. And this is the only way to get good at the GMAT quantitative section. There is no true trick. There are tricks to maybe specific types of problems like prime numbers, but that is where I highly encourage you to go through this and really figure that out yourself and know what you know or don't know. One example of kind of specific tricks is there's a thread like most efficient ways to study least common multiples on the GMAT. These things actually have tricks, but this is just one problem of, nearly hundreds of concepts on the math GMAT that they'll test you for. So go through these, remember the time box problems, and I hope you figure out a balance. Really push your brain, take breaks, and follow the tips that I've given overall on study habits, and I hope that you're able to do well in the GMAT. And don't forget from my first video, the pacing of the practice tests, because you're buying those practice tests when you sign up for the GMAT, and those practice tests are a finite resource, and you really need to take advantage of those. So use the GMAT form here and all of these questions as a way to study in between every test rather than wasting your precious tests. Alright, thanks for watching. Sorry I didn't get around to more practice problems, but the next video is where I think showing you how I actually write an essay will be more important. So stay tuned for that, and then my last video will be the opportunity cost of a GMAT. So stay tuned, thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.